The morning began like any other episode of Good Morning America, with the usual upbeat music, cheerful hosts, and a promise of lively discussions that would keep viewers tuned in. But this particular broadcast would soon shift from polished professionalism to raw confrontation when Hollywood actor Seann Penn took his seat opposite Michael Strahan. What was expected to be a standard promotional interview quickly morphed into a tense verbal standoff, leaving the studio crew scrambling and audiences around the country buzzing. From the very first exchange, the tone hinted that Penn was not in the mood for softball questions or the kind of glossy TV charm that Strahan typically brought to the table. Penn, dressed in his signature casual style with tousled hair and a rugged jacket, looked restless even before Strahan introduced him. Strahan opened with a question about Penn's new film, a project the actor had poured his energy into. But rather than easing into a discussion about the movie, Penn seemed irritated, almost dismissive, and redirected the conversation toward what he felt were larger social issues. Strahan, always calm under pressure, attempted to bring the dialogue back on track, yet Penn's sharp tone cut through the usual morning show warmth, signaling that this was going to be far from a routine celebrity segment. As the conversation unfolded, Strahan shifted into a more personal angle, asking about Penn's long-standing reputation as a Hollywood maverick. That was when the tension spiked. Penn leaned forward, his voice rising slightly, criticizing the way the media often framed him as difficult or controversial. He accused networks of focusing on his temperament instead of his craft. Strahan, maintaining his poise, tried to clarify that the question came from a place of admiration. Yet Penn took it as another example of how he was constantly misunderstood. The energy in the room shifted dramatically, and the smiles of the co-hosts off-camera began to fade. Viewers who tuned in expecting light-hearted banter were stunned by the actor's combative tone. Penn launched into a critique of celebrity culture, calling out what he described as manufactured narratives that distracted from real conversations about art, politics, and humanity. Strahan nodded politely but attempted to interject, only for Penn to raise his hand and continue speaking. This unusual display of dominance on live television made the control room nervous, with producers frantically signaling Strahan through his earpiece to regain control of the interview before it spiraled further off course. Strahan, known for his smooth diplomacy on air, tried to lighten the mood by cracking a gentle joke about Penn's intensity. But instead of easing the tension, Penn snapped back that he didn't find the situation amusing. His voice grew louder, and his words more pointed. He accused television platforms of trivializing serious discussions by masking them with entertainment fluff. The exchange became more heated, with Penn demanding to be taken seriously and Strahan attempting to steer the interview into safer territory, though every pivot seemed to ignite Penn even more. The audience in the studio grew noticeably uncomfortable. Some shifted in their seats. Others whispered nervously. Penn's raw energy contrasted sharply with the carefully curated environment of a morning talk show. Strahan, refusing to escalate, calmly reiterated his respect for Penn's career and reminded viewers that they were here to discuss his new film. But Penn brushed that off, suggesting that the very act of promoting movies on such shows was part of a machine he despised. The irony was thick, and even Strahan couldn't hide his surprise at the contradiction in Penn's statements. Cameras captured Penn gesturing with his hands, his face flushed with passion as he doubled down on his critique. He accused mainstream outlets of silencing authentic voices in favor of packaged stories that pleased advertisers. Strahan, sensing that the exchange could damage the show's reputation if not carefully handled, gently asked Penn what message he truly wanted the audience to take away. That question only seemed to embolden Penn further, as he launched into a near monologue about corruption, politics, and the role of media in shaping public opinion. The clash reached a turning point when Strahan, still calm but more assertive now, pushed back slightly against Penn's generalizations. He pointed out that journalists, producers, and anchors worked hard to balance entertainment with meaningful conversations. He reminded Penn that millions of viewers tuned in each day for information, connection, and a sense of stability. But Penn wasn't swayed. He accused Strahan of defending a system rather than addressing the real issue at hand. The tension was palpable, and even those watching at home could sense that something rare and unfiltered was happening live on television. Strahan attempted once again to ground the conversation in the topic of Penn's film, but the actor seemed uninterested. Instead, Penn leaned closer to Strahan, lowering his voice into a stern, almost confrontational tone, telling him that society didn't need more distractions, it needed truth. Strahan, holding his ground with professional composure, assured Penn that honesty was precisely what they were striving for, though the platform and format might differ from what Penn envisioned. The studio air grew heavy, the clash of ideals unfolding in real time before millions. At this point, producers backstage were debating whether to cut the segment short, but the decision wasn't easy. Moments like this drew massive attention, and controversy often translated into ratings. They decided to let it play out, trusting Strahan to de-escalate the situation. Strahan, aware of the eyes on him, shifted gears again, acknowledging Penn's frustration while also reminding him of the importance of dialogue rather than confrontation. This subtle reframing bought him some breathing room, but Penn remained visibly agitated, refusing to soften his tone. Strahan attempted to bridge the gap by asking Penn if his frustrations with the media were tied to specific personal experiences. Penn seized the opportunity, launching into stories about interviews he had done in the past where his comments were allegedly taken out of context. He cited examples of being labeled volatile or difficult, insisting that these caricatures overshadowed his humanitarian work and his commitment to storytelling. The intensity in his voice rose again, and Strahan's calm nodding gave viewers a clear picture of two men locked in an ideological tug-of-war, one trying to express frustration and the other trying to preserve civility. As the discussion deepened, Penn's words became more emotional, touching on how damaging it felt to constantly be portrayed as an angry outsider. He stressed that while he had a reputation for bluntness, his aim was always to spark meaningful conversation rather than sensational headlines. Strahan sympathized, acknowledging that media narratives could sometimes be reductive, but he reminded Penn that journalists also had a responsibility to audiences. This back and forth demonstrated not only the friction between them but also their contrasting perspectives on the role of media and shaping cultural dialogue. At one point, Penn stood up slightly from his chair, gesturing dramatically as he spoke. The cameras quickly adjusted, capturing the rawness of the moment. Strahan, unfazed, asked whether Penn thought platforms like Good Morning America could evolve to host the kind of deeper discussions he was advocating for. Penn smirked, suggesting that change was possible but doubting whether the courage existed within corporate structures to risk losing advertising dollars. His words were laced with cynicism, and Strahan, though respectful, reminded Penn that sometimes change began with small steps rather than grand revolutions. The clash of energies between Penn's fiery passion and Strahan's steady professionalism created a gripping spectacle. By now, social media was already buzzing, with clips of the tense exchange spreading rapidly online. Viewers at home tweeted reactions ranging from admiration of Penn's boldness to discomfort at his aggression toward a usually unflappable host. In the studio, tension mingled with fascination, as everyone realized they were witnessing an unscripted moment that would dominate headlines for days. Strahan leaned forward slightly, making it clear he wasn't going to let the conversation derail completely. Strahan took a more personal turn, asking Penn what he hoped audiences would take away from his new film, even if he despised the promotional cycle. Penn hesitated, his expression softening just a little, before explaining that the movie was meant to spark reflection about resilience, compassion, and the state of the human condition. For a brief moment, the storm calmed as Penn eloquently described his artistic vision. The relief in the studio was noticeable, yet it didn't last long, as Penn quickly pivoted back to criticizing the way such projects were marketed and consumed in a superficial culture. Trying to diffuse the growing hostility again, Strahan complimented Penn's dedication to causes outside of Hollywood, mentioning his humanitarian work in disaster zones. Penn, visibly proud of that aspect of his life, opened up about his experiences on the ground, where he witnessed suffering firsthand and worked alongside communities to rebuild. Yet even in this moment of connection, Penn circled back to criticize the media for failing to highlight those efforts with the same intensity they highlighted his supposed temper. The interview swung like a pendulum between cooperation and confrontation. Strahan, with decades of on-air experience, attempted to gently remind Penn that conflict itself often drew more attention than good deeds. Penn's response was sharp. He argued that the public only consumed what was put before them, and the media chose which stories to amplify. He accused broadcasters of perpetuating cycles of negativity because it was profitable. Strahan countered that viewers bore responsibility too, since ratings drove programming decisions. The exchange had now transformed into a philosophical debate about accountability, and both men seemed unwilling to concede ground. The energy in the studio became electric, with every sentence carrying the weight of two different worldviews colliding. Penn, pacing slightly in his seat, grew more animated, his words spilling out with urgency. Strahan, still measured, asked whether Penn believed audiences could truly embrace complexity in a fast-paced media landscape. Penn's answer was unequivocal: yes, if the gatekeepers allowed it. His frustration was clearer. He believed change was possible but was being blocked by corporate interests. Strahan nodded but reminded him that progress often required cooperation, not just critique. As the debate stretched on, the control room considered cutting to commercial, but the spectacle was too riveting to interrupt. Strahan seized the strategic pause to shift the tone again, thanking Penn for speaking so candidly and acknowledging the importance of uncomfortable conversations. This move slightly softened Penn's posture, though his eyes still burned with intensity. He admitted that he appreciated Strahan's willingness to engage but stressed that most of the media world was not as open. The grudging respect between them became visible, even amid the sparks. Strahan leaned in, emphasizing that Good Morning America often tried to balance entertainment with depth, citing past interviews that tackled serious topics. Penn dismissed those examples as rare exceptions, arguing that they were drowned out by fluff segments designed to sell products or appeal to advertisers. Strahan, refusing to let the comment sting, calmly responded that audiences often craved lightheartedness in the morning as much as they craved seriousness. The two exchanged a long look, Penn unrelenting in his critique, Strahan unwavering in his defense. The interview's volatility began to take on a rhythm of its own. Penn would fire off accusations about the shallow nature of broadcast television, and Strahan would counter with steady logic and reminders of the audience's expectations. Their verbal sparring resembled a boxing match. Penn's jabs of cynicism against Strahan's calm, methodical responses. Neither man backed down, and the longer the segment went on, the more viewers were drawn into the spectacle. The co-hosts waiting off-camera sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. At one particularly heated moment, Penn accused Strahan directly of playing into the system rather than challenging it. The comment struck hard, but Strahan maintained composure, replying that his role was not to dismantle television but to create space for voices like Penn's. He pointed out that the very fact Penn was allowed to speak so freely on live television proved the platform's openness. Penn smirked, clearly unconvinced, yet the tension cracked just slightly as Strahan's calm demeanor diffused what could have escalated into outright shouting. Penn then shifted gears, reflecting on his career and how he had often sabotaged his own opportunities by refusing to play by Hollywood's rules. He admitted that his stubbornness cost him relationships and professional opportunities, but he insisted he wouldn't have it any other way. Strahan acknowledged Penn's honesty and suggested that his uncompromising nature was both his greatest strength and his biggest challenge. This moment of self-awareness added depth to the exchange, showing Penn not just as combative but also as self-critical. The interview's intensity was beginning to take a toll. Penn's voice cracked slightly as he emphasized how exhausting it was to constantly fight against narratives he felt distorted his truth. Strahan, sensing a vulnerable moment, gently asked what kept him going despite the frustrations. Penn's answer was simple yet profound: his belief in the power of art and the responsibility of artists to provoke thought. The audience, both in the studio and at home, leaned in, realizing that beneath the fiery exterior was a man deeply committed to his craft and ideals. Just as the energy seemed to calm, Penn reignited the flames by accusing morning shows of exploiting vulnerable moments for ratings. Strahan denied that accusation, insisting that their purpose was connection, not exploitation. Penn shook his head, skeptical, and the room tensed again. The back and forth now resembled a seesaw, constantly swinging between moments of respect and moments of sharp conflict. Strahan never raised his voice, but his firm replies made it clear he wasn't allowing Penn to dominate the conversation entirely. The co-hosts were finally brought into the conversation, trying to balance the dynamic. One of them complimented Penn's passion and asked how he managed to channel so much intensity into his acting roles. For the first time, Penn smiled faintly, explaining that his work gave him an outlet for emotions that otherwise might consume him. This rare glimpse of warmth offered a reprieve from the tension, though it was short-lived. Penn quickly reminded everyone that interviews like this often reduced actors to sound bites, undermining the depth he tried to bring to his craft. Strahan seized on that point, suggesting that perhaps Penn's frustration was rooted in a clash between long-form artistry and short-form media. Penn agreed, saying that the culture demanded simplicity when life was inherently complex. He insisted that television could do better if it dared to treat audiences as intelligent rather than passive. Strahan acknowledged the challenge but reminded Penn that accessibility was part of television's power. The exchange revealed a philosophical gulf between them, Penn yearning for depth, Strahan defending reach. As the interview approached its scheduled end, producers frantically gestured to wrap things up. But Strahan wasn't finished. He gave Penn one last chance to share a final thought with the audience. Penn, visibly calmer but still intense, urged viewers to question the narratives presented to them and to demand more honesty from both media and politics. His words carried weight, and for a moment, the studio fell into a reflective silence. Strahan thanked him, assuring Penn that the conversation, though difficult, was meaningful for everyone watching. The segment closed with polite handshakes, but the tension was still evident. Strahan smiled for the cameras, his professionalism never faltering, while Penn leaned back with an expression that blended defiance and relief. The co-hosts transitioned awkwardly into the next segment, their voices slightly shaky, aware that what had just unfolded was far from ordinary morning television. Behind the scenes, producers were already strategizing how to spin the clash into a viral moment that would dominate headlines throughout the day. By the time the credits rolled, the fallout had begun. Social media erupted with debates about who was right, with some praising Penn for speaking truth to power and others criticizing him for being combative and disrespectful. Strahan was lauded for his composure under pressure, while Penn was both admired and admonished for his refusal to play along. The interview became an instant cultural flashpoint, a reminder that live television, despite its polished veneer, could still capture moments of raw, unpredictable humanity that no script could ever replicate.